All right. And then the last thing to share is that we are going to be referencing at some point something called Empower Tools. So if you haven't worked with us before, we do a lot of data related work. That's pretty much what we do. And we have a ton of free resources on our website. And some of those are these one-page handouts called Empower Tools. They cover tons of different topics about collecting meaningful data, storing data, building a data culture in your organization, lots and lots of things. And they're all free, they're easy to download, and they're at our website. So I will drop the link to these in the chat. But just know that those are really great summaries or refreshers. If you attend this training and then you're like, oh, I'm worried I'm going to forget, you can download the related Empower tools in order to give yourself a little refresher.
Thank you so much, Anne. Yeah, you'll see a little symbol on the name of the Empower tool, if I remember to put it. All right, here's our plan for today. Our goal is to talk about how to use data for decision making, of course. But I want to start by saying that using data in this way isn't a one-time thing. It's not, let's create a survey, see what people say, and then never use it again. What I want to talk about today is using data to drive your decision-making as a practice. So weaving those practices into your daily routine, into your job descriptions, into the culture of your organization, so that you always have the data you need to make decisions when they come up. Because you know what it's like if you say, oh, we want to know something. Oh, let's write a survey, and in 6 months we can know. It's about starting it now so that you already have that data. And so you will know when those questions come up. And it's also so that you can stay dynamic and responsive. One of our sort of core values here at the Capacity Collective is being transparent and accountable to community, right? So not just taking data from people, but being able to show it back and show it how it's being used. So this is a powerful way to do that, to weave that into your processes. And so we're going to talk about these practices as a cycle. And I'm going to break one of my usual rules. I hate using business speak, just not my favorite, but I am going to use a business term that sort of makes me, it's not my favorite term, but it gets the point across. It's CQI, or continuous quality improvement. So the term itself to be very businessy, but the concept of continuously getting data, looking at the data and making improvements, that's what we're going to talk about today. So we're going to talk about it as a cycle. So here's our agenda. We're going to talk about CQI and why you should care about it. And then we're going to discuss the steps of the CQI cycle, which is forming your team, determining your questions, reviewing your data, planning for the data you don't already have, and then analyzing the data. That's the cycle, and then you get to start all over again. So that is our agenda that we're going to cover today. Any questions, concerns, anything before we dive in?
I have a question. Could you just share a little bit more about the Capacity Collective? I think this is my first time in a training, so I just love to hear a little bit more about you all before we dive in, if that's okay.
Oh, yeah, that's great. I love it. Yeah, so we have been around just for 3 years about, and we do data capacity building support. So we work with nonprofits, almost all of whom are led by immigrant and refugee groups. And so we all come from this experience of working in nonprofits, or I was a professor, so I worked in higher education, and just having these shared values that there are these organizations who are doing the greatest, most innovative, interesting work in communities, and they are totally under-resourced, and it's so hard to prove your impact, and it's so hard to compete with those big organizations that have a whole team of data people. So we have come together to try to, we're a little bit Robin Hood. We like to take from the business world or take from higher education and actually help communities to brag about all of the amazing work they're doing. So that is approximately what we do. We're a group of nerds. That's what we like. Yeah, all data all the time. But definitely follow up if you want to talk more. And several of our clients are on here and would happily talk about all the fun things we get to do together. Well, thank you for that question.
You guys make data fun. So I appreciate that.
You are so kind. Yeah, we actually pay Sophia to be here and say good things about us. It's a good relationship. Yeah. All right. So what the bleep is CQI? So it is, as I said, such a business speak, continuous quality improvement, and it is businessy, right? But it's different from the data you're already collecting and analyzing. And so I should also just give you the heads up that most of our clients, because they're nonprofits, they're also working specifically in early learning spaces. And so a lot of these examples are going to be based on home visiting programs, doula programs. But if that is not what your organization does, I'm hoping that it's also applicable, but we can certainly brainstorm the differences. Yeah, so this is different from collecting data because the funder wants you to. This is collecting data because you care about the impacts that you're making and you want to be responsive and you want to do better. It's different because you're answering actual questions, not just submitting outputs to justify why the funder gave you money, right? So it's moving from outputs to outcomes. Are we doing what we set out to do? How well are we doing it? And how will we know that? Beyond what the funder cares about, what do you care about? And we always say program first, funder second, or third or fourth, right? It's about the people that you're serving. So when you want to secure new funding, when you want to brag to your donors, when you want to motivate your staff, that's different types of data. That's not just outputs, that's your outcomes. But you're already collecting tons of data. So it's really about leveraging the power of the data you already have and then finding a few little gaps and plugging in with a couple new measures if you need it. But ideally, it's just looking at the data you're already collecting through a different lens of this continuous quality improvement. So this is the official definition, right? It's identifying, describing, and analyzing strengths and problems. Right? So it's looking at your program in this critical way, not critical in a negative, but critical as a nuanced, right? Like critical thinking. And then, so really pulling out those strengths, where could we improve? And then testing, implementing, learning, and revising solutions, right? So that's what the process is, but officially, really, it's a cycle. So you identify, describe, and analyze, you test, implement, learn, and revise. Then you go back to identifying, describing, and you stay in this loop. So that's why it's continuous improvement, ideally. So then why should you care? Why should you use data for decision making? So, which really is the question, why did you come today, right? So I imagine you self-selected into a workshop like this because you're already convinced that you have an interest in using your data for decision making. But I still want to talk about the benefits in a concrete way to really talk about why it's worth not just doing once, but doing regularly as part of your regular practices. So first, it helps you to understand if you're even meeting your program goals. Are you doing what you set out to do? And ideally, how well are you doing it? Right? Beyond just simple numbers. And second, it helps you remember your data isn't just for funders, it's for you. So it helps you, it sort of forces you to go back and look at your vision and your mission again and say, are we out there in the weeds or are we really sticking to the values that we expressed when we got into this work? And third, this is really a great way to be responsive and not just that, but accountable to community. So ideally, you're continuously seeking feedback from the community that you serve, and you're giving that data back because ultimately it's their data, right? It's their stories, it's their lives. So hopefully you're gathering it and you're sharing it back. And when you're in a cycle of continuous improvement, that means you can be responsive to emerging needs. It isn't that you're going to analyze it 6 months later when BSK is asking for their next report. You're going to know continuously, wow, I see a trend that we have more domestic violence cases. How do we need to react? I see a trend that more and more people are struggling with housing. What do we need to do? Right? So it really enables you to be responsive. And fourth, to make decisions based on data. I mean, I'm guessing that you have 100 hypotheses right now about your work, about the impacts you're having, about what's going well and what's not. Data helps you test those hypotheses. It helps you make your decisions based on evidence, right? So it's not just, well, my gut feeling tells me, but it lets you back it up. It gives you that validation and justification for the decisions you're making. Let's see. Fifth, when you're continuously looking at your data and involving your team in the process, which I'll talk more about, it's this really powerful way of keeping your team engaged. Then you're looking at the data together, you're using the data together, that helps you get buy-in from staff, which makes them care more about the data and your data quality goes up. And it also becomes a great motivator. I think we've all worked in those jobs where we had to do a bunch of data entry that just sort of disappeared into the cloud, and you never see it come back to you. When you see it come back and you see the real impacts you're making, that's a great motivator. And maybe it helps that, so when you know that you have 2 hours of notes you have to put in the computer, at least you know it's worth it, right? So having this continuous look at the data is a great motivator, honestly. And it also honors the fact that the people who are doing data entry in your organization have some serious expertise. They're the ones that are in the front lines. They're closest to families, if that's who you serve. So honoring that expertise by involving them in the decision-making gives you the opportunity to improve your processes and your practices. They can tell you, ask the direct service people. They can always tell you, what's going on and where improvements can be made. But why else? Why else would you want to come to a workshop about data for decision-making? What are the other benefits from your perspectives? Learning how to interpret the data. I'm going to talk about that in a bit. Thank you. Asking good questions in the first place. I like that. Yeah, you get better at asking questions when you see what the data is on the other end. You go, oh, okay, next time I'm going to ask that differently. Great. Identifying external trends and threats and opportunities for long-term strategy. Yeah, love it. Help inform program development and improvements. I mean, have you all worked at those jobs where the data just goes nowhere? I feel like that's most of the jobs I've worked. So yeah, I love the potential and leveraging that. It's wonderful. Challenge assumptions and settle staff disagreements. Oh, I feel like there's a story there. Okay, but I like the challenge assumptions, right? Especially if funders are coming from a place of like a top-down approach, or they have some stereotypes. It is your chance to challenge some of those assumptions. Settle staff disagreements. If you want to tell us about that, you should. Prove who's more right. Oh, thank you for all of these. This is great. All right, so this is the CQI cycle. And you'll notice that there's an empower tool symbol at the bottom, because we have an empower tool that covers this whole cycle. And pretty much all the details I'm going to talk about today are on that worksheet, which doesn't mean you should just bail and go read the worksheet. You should still hang out here, but just know that you will have that as a refresher. So again, it's a CQI cycle, so noting that it's not a one-time activity, it's a practice. And so today we're going to go through each of these steps. First, forming your team, right? Getting the right people at the table, or building a new table if you have to get the right people there to make those good decisions. Second, determine your questions. What do you wish you knew about your program? Third, data review. What data do you have right now to answer those questions? Fourth, data planning. What data do you not yet have but need to answer those questions? So that's the stage of planning the measures you want to try to weave in the future. Fifth is data processes. So how are you going to put those new measures into your data processes in a way that it's sustainable, low barrier, that you're not creating more burden on your staff? And then sixth, which I just want to power through and get to this part because I love this part. We'll talk about how to look at your data and pull out those stories you need to be able to make decisions. So this is our plan. And I see that we did have a follow-up. about the employee disagreements. It's just sometimes staff disagree about what needs to be prioritized, but everyone has their own little bubble or perspective. Data can provide a broader view. I love that. That is an excellent point. And of course, everyone is going to be, they're engaged, they're so engaged with what they do that for them, it is the most important perspective, right? So I love the first step, we're going to talk about forming a team, bringing everyone together and working that out and figuring that out and looking at the data together is great for that. Maybe it won't settle all of the disagreements, but it does give you something concrete to talk about priorities. All right, so step one, as you saw in the cycle, our first step, and I was just talking about it, is to get the right people at the table to make decisions. And I was a professor, and I was also, because I was a professor, that means I was a student for a really long time. And I know group work is the worst. So my first thought is not, oh, let's build a team, but it is worth it, especially in a process like this. So why would you want a team? Why wouldn't you just do it on your own? Getting the right team together is really making sure you have this range of experiences, this range of perspectives at the table, so that when you make decisions, you're making it in meaningful ways that are really giving everyone the opportunity to weigh in. It builds transparency, it builds buy-in, it builds in that accountability. As much as we like to think so, no one person can know everything. And I will note that we also have an Empower tool on this, just a whole Empower tool on how to get teams together when you want to make complex decisions. All right, the why a team helps you think through the unintended consequences, which honestly is my favorite part of getting a team together. Is somebody's going to say, yeah, but it's going to affect this group differently. Yeah, but did you think about it this way? It gets you to such a better place. And honestly, you can just accomplish more. You've got more people, more brains to do the work. And it makes it so you can find and fix issues more quickly before they grow, because you're just going to have different perspectives there, more eyes on the project, right? And it allows you to test strategies on a wider audience, right? So people can take it to their different teams or departments, and you can test strategies. And of course, it just includes more diverse experiences and forms of expertise, which can only improve any process, but certainly including this. Thank you, Em, for putting links in the chat to our Empower tools. All right, so then the other part of forming a team is who should be on that team. And I think that we all have this experience. You probably all have great insight into this. So please feel free to add to the list that I came up with. But first and foremost, bring in the people who are most impacted by the work and by the decisions you're going to make with that data. So that includes community members whenever you can, but please talk to the people on the ground. Talk to the people who are working most closely with your families. They have such a great vantage point on all of this. And I think we've all also probably worked in places that were very top down, where people were making decisions on your behalf. And we're all about tossing aside the hierarchy, however you say that, and working together and having everyone's perspective included. So in both of those cases, communities and direct service, you're talking about folks who've had decisions made on their behalf. So it's a great way of thinking about it. Who is going to be impacted the most by this decision? Let's get them at the table. But also, who's just historically been excluded from decision making? Right? Who, again, have people been making decisions on their behalf, or do the same people always get tapped to come in and make decisions? Or, are there some quieter voices that you can pull in? Is there someone who could bring in a new, unique perspective? And think through what each person can bring to the table. Some people bring knowledge, some people bring experience, particular skills, some people bring connections, that kind of social capital. Some people bring trusting relationships with the communities, which is huge. To really think through what can we pull together with our decision-making team. And then, and I want to thank Em for pointing this out when we were going through this presentation earlier, get someone at the table who can actually enact the changes. If you're going to take all this time and put your heart and soul into it, set yourself up in a way that allows you to be successful. Have someone at the table while still monitoring the kind of power dynamics of the group to make sure that everyone doesn't just silence up when the person with power comes in the room, but have someone that is going to have access to actually implementing the change so that your time is worth it. And I also put this up in the corner, make it possible for people to participate. If that involves compensating for extra time or moving some caseload over so people can have the time to participate. Where is it located? What's the schedule? Are they parents? Are there other things that you need to work around? Really try to make it work so that people can participate fully, and then you're going to get more value out of putting everyone together on this team. Are there other tips people have about pulling together really good, solid teams for making decisions? Well, good, that means I nailed it. That's great. Right. Well, then I'm sure there are others though. All right. Then you determine your questions. So get together and start brainstorming. What do we wish we knew about our programs or the families we serve or the people that we work with? And so I'm going to ask you again to drop that in the chat. Thank you for being a pretty great list. Yeah, so drop in the chat. What is it that you wish you knew about the work you're doing? Feel free to throw in a couple. You wish you were meeting goals. For example, I wish I knew if our parents really feel more confident about their parenting. I know there's several people in here that teach parenting class. I wish I could really show the bosses that when you take the time to match your staff to your families by culture, it's a different experience for them, right? I wish I could prove something, or I wish I knew if we were doing this in a meaningful way. I wish I knew what impact our parent groups had on the children of the parents. Oh yeah. And that's such a long-term thing because it is so hard to measure, right? Because you can say, what do the parents say about this class, but how does it impact the kids long-term? Great questions. I wish I knew how to navigate interesting challenge behaviors and provide equitable programs. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, so being able to test which approaches work and which approaches really can help with equity issues. Great. What's the impact of having to engage in a hybrid world? Our programs meetings are both in-person and virtual, and that requires a lot, both from staff and the scholars and families we're working with. Yeah, and that's achievable. You could measure what is that impact for sure. I wish I knew what relationships and projects formed out of parent groups and programs. What participants went on to do. Oh, that's always the dream, is to actually be able to see the long-term effects, right? Relatedly, what do parents seek as the next step after parent groups? That's a great question. I wish I understood early the impact of my culture upbringing to my children born and growing up here in the USA. We'll talk about a complex thing to measure. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, there's so much interesting research about what it's like to be first generation versus 1.5 versus a second generation moving to the US. That's interesting. So these are great. Keep dumping them in there. I love it. So thank you so much for those of you that have shared already. So the great thing about doing something like this as a team is that other people will think of questions you would not have thought of, right? So even when you see the other people asking questions, maybe that's getting some questions started for you. So brainstorming, of course, can just get you into these deeper, more meaningful questions. These are the types of questions we hear most often from our clients. How do we know if we're achieving our mission? Are we serving the right people, meaning the people who need our services? Who is being left behind? Are we missing some folks? That one is so important to me. I used to work in a lot of advocacy for people who are experiencing homelessness. And it took me a minute to figure out how many of those programs were not serving people who use drugs. And so there was this whole component of the homeless community that was so far from getting resources because that was just too taboo for groups, right? Who's being left behind? When we draw our boundaries, who's left? Are we making a difference? Where are we making those differences and how well? Are our clients meeting their goals? How can we improve our programs and services? Those are the things we hear all the time. Anything else that you would add that you either like building on what you put in the chat or something else that came to mind when we went through this list? I will say here that you don't feel like you have to take on this whole list or all of these big questions at one time. You don't have to take on 20 questions at once. Depending on the complexity of the questions, you're probably just taking on a few at a time, honestly. Yeah, are we including the voices of parents and families? Absolutely, a great question. Yeah. Big picture, what you're trying to do is cultivate a culture of curiosity, which is a ridiculous thing to say. But data shouldn't be punitive. It should be inspiring. It should be motivating. It should be celebrating, right? So create and maintain a culture where staff at all levels have questions and have a place to bring those questions up and find out what the results are. That's the dream. I know that's a lot, but having a culture where people are excited to bring new ideas and excited to ask questions because they know those questions will go somewhere. It's incredible. It's very empowering. All right. Some of these are going to be a little bit quick because some of these we're going to spend a little bit more time on, including data review. So our third step in our CQI cycle, we've put together our team, we've asked some questions. Now, we want to know, well, what data do we have to even answer those questions? Are we asking the right questions to answer those questions, right? So I'm bringing in one of our questions from step 2. How do we know if we're achieving our mission? So let's say that that's my question. That's what my decision-making team and I are going to tackle. How can we answer that? There's really 3 steps to answering it. First, you need to operationalize your measures. That is like my favorite word because it's so many syllables and I love syllables, but what do I mean by operationalize? It does not mean you have to operate on anyone, I promise. What, does anyone have a good description of what operationalization is? It's such a researchy word. All right, well, here, I'll give you an example. Here's a pop quiz. Which of the following is breakfast? A, B, C, D, or E? What do people think? You can unmute, put in the chat, whatever you think. Which one of those is a breakfast?
Any of them.
Any of them? Yeah, whichever one you eat, right? Exactly. I mean, of course, this is right. But this is the difference between defining your measures and operationalizing your measures. This is the like thing that we talk about in the research world. If you just define breakfast, it's a meal eaten in the morning, or it's the first meal of the day. But what you want to do is operationalize it. What do I mean by that? How do I know it when I see it, right? Because the definitions can vary greatly by culture. Yeah, they do look very tasty. Man, food is a thing here. Yeah, so the whole point of operationalization at the end of the day is to really think beyond the definition, but how are you going to know it when you see it? What do you mean by that? So operationalization is turning the concepts, really complicated concepts, into something you can actually measure. The example, when I would teach research methods class, I would use the example of how do you measure something that's so complicated like racism, right? You can't walk up to people and like, I've got a clipboard. Please tell me, are you racist? Yes or no? Strongly agree, strongly disagree. But you can find many ways to measure such a complex concept, right? So people have done studies on if you send out resumes with a name that sounds Latino or a name that sounds, you know, stereotypically Black, are you less likely to get a call back? There's research about, do people do cashiers hand money back in your hand or on the counter, depending on the appearance of race of the customer, right? There's 1,000 ways that people have studied race behavior, but it's a complex concept, right? You have to be able to break that down into something observable. So again, it's measuring what it is and what it's not. So let's say your program wants to measure breastfeeding at 6 months. This is actually a really common measure that a lot of doula programs measure and a lot of early learning programs measure. And I think it's one of the questions that the SK has asked for historically. But you have to decide if you have something you want to measure, you decide as a program in the center here, this green column, breastfeeding is 6 months. What do we mean by that? Okay, that means that a child was breastfed at least 1 time per day, each day over the past 2 weeks. I really made this up. I have no idea what the official definition is. This is just my guess at it. Plus, the child is between 5.5 months and 6.5 months at the time of visit. And I said that because that's a little bit more realistic than you're going to go see every kid exactly on the day they turn 6 months, right? So you're sort of forced to operationalize. What do you mean by breastfeeding at 6 months? So as soon as you draw those boundaries, then you're also deciding what it's not. So the people who stopped breastfeeding at 4 months, that's not going to count. People who never breastfed, not going to count. I breastfeed about once per week on average. Okay, well, that doesn't count either, right? So I breastfeed at least 1 time a day, but some days it's not all days. I was breastfeeding, but I just stopped 3 weeks ago, or the child is 5.25 months old, right? So it's drawing those boundaries. And that's what I mean about the complexity of operationalization. So you have to sit down and decide, what do we mean by that? So here's, so with that, the number one question we get asked probably is, how do we know we're doing well? So then my first question is, well, how do you define success? And when you work with families, you know that the definition of success can vary widely depending on the family. What's a success for one family is, you know, one of the parents got a full-time job or got their GED, and the next family, it's one person was able to advocate for themselves with the school or made a phone call on their own without your help, right? Success is very different. Oh, we have a question here. Does operationalization mean specific defined behavior or certain data that we need to collect? That's a good question. So it's specifying, so it's sort of impacting both because it's asking the questions in a way that allows you to capture it the way you need it. So if you say you want to measure our parents breastfeeding at 6 months, then you have to ask that question. You have to ask, are you breastfeeding? How old is the baby? Like you have to be able to piece those things together, and you have to ask, how frequently are you breastfeeding? And all, like you have to put those measures together to be able to answer that question. Are our parents still breastfeeding when the child is 6 months? So it's operationalization is really super defining exactly what you mean so that you can ask the questions in the right way to piece together your answer. I hope that's helpful, but definitely keep chatting with me if I can explain that better, or if anyone else is able to explain it. I love that too. All right, so again, we get asked all the time, how do we know we're doing well? And I say, okay, well, how do you define success? So one of the things that we have found to be helpful when people are trying to operationalize, are we doing well, is we use this sort of Mad Lib, this fill in the blank. We know things are going well when children are what? Your group can talk that out. We know things are going well with our program when caregivers are blank, families are blank, right? And I like to think all the way with children, caregivers, families, communities. And I also like to include staff, right? That's the neglected part of all of this is we get so focused on families, which of course we should, but our staff are core to that. So if our program is doing well, then staff should be doing well too. So just defining what that means. So here are some definitions that we hear from our clients. I think most of these are probably BSK have asked for type questions, right? So we know we're doing well when children are ready for kindergarten. Caregivers are confident in their parenting. Families are living in stable housing. Communities are more engaged compared to when they started working with us. They're finding more community, or they're coming to more events, or staff are staying on the job longer. And that's always the dream, let's be honest, right? So of course, your program should think way beyond this, but this is just a place to start, right? So just thinking about some examples of how do we know we're doing well? Parents are happy to see us. Parents are meeting their goals, whatever it is, right? So just starting with these as simple examples. And then once you've operationalized what you mean, you can start to think about how to connect those concepts or those measures with your data. You can start to think about, where are we already collecting this data? Because here's the thing, you're already collecting, guaranteed, hundreds of measures. Your intake forms alone probably have 50, 60 to 100 measures, right? So look at that data before you decide to make something new, right? Like, don't, like, use the wonderful things you're already collecting. So, okay, how will we know if our children are ready for kindergarten? Well, some of you probably have something like a school readiness assessment, right? So that's one way you could know, is you could have those assessments. Caregivers are confident in their parenting. How could we know that? Well, do we have a parenting self-assessment? You know, if not, you can consider that, but maybe you already have some measure where you've been asking people about their confidence in their parenting. Families are living in stable housing. How can you know that? Look at the address history. Is it changing every 2 months? Are folks reporting that they're experiencing homelessness? But there's also, if you have any sort of goal tracking, you can look through the notes, or you can look through the data there and see, are people moving into more stable housing situations? Or communities are more engaged. You can see attendance at community events. People are coming to town hall meetings and they're actually saying something at those town hall meetings, right? These are ways that you're probably already collecting data, and you can start to put these stories together. For staff staying on the job longer, you could talk to human resources. They probably can tell you how long people have been on the job and stuff like that. And I also like to always put in a plug for a staff survey or some sort of staff focus groups or interviews to know, how are your staff doing, right? And you can learn so much from all of that. Okay, so that's first you operationalize, and then you start to say, okay, let's review the data. Let's look and see, what are we already collecting? So we're gonna get way more deeply into that. But first, I don't know, do people feel like it's break time, or should we get a little bit further? Break time? Break. I'm seeing break with an exclamation point, so that's serious. Okay, so then how about, I have 3:48 on my clock. How about 3:55? Is that long enough for people? And then we'll reconvene. Amazing. Thank you. Em, do you mind pausing the recording, and then we'll see everyone back in a few minutes? All right. Thank you, Emily. Emily started us up again. All right. Thank you. All right. So I'm going to turn it over to Em for a few minutes.
Great, welcome back everyone. So before the break, we were talking a little bit about a data review, and now I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So as we mentioned before, you are probably already gathering hundreds of pieces of data. Even if you only have one main funding source like BSK, they alone are asking you for so much data about your participants. And you probably have even more data that you're gathering that's not just for your funder. So again, it's always important to look at what data you already have before you design a new assessment or survey, because that will just put a lot more labor on everyone. So most programs, and probably your program, gathers 3 different types of data. The first is program data. So that's data that is relevant or specific to your program. That could be an intake form. One way to think about this would be in terms of the BSK reporting. It's the how much data.
I don't hear Emily.
Hi,
And
welcome back.
Yes, okay, thanks.
Okay. Then there is, oh, can y'all hear me? Okay, sorry, I think I'm having some internet issues. So if you can't hear me at any point, just let me know. Then we've got fidelity data. So I had never heard of this term before, but if you adhere to a model, you might have heard of this term. You can basically think about this as the BSK how well measures if you're a BSK funded program. So basically it's data that measures if the program is doing what it's supposed to do or what you said it was going to do. So that could be the number of home visits you've administered, it could be ASQ scores, it could be graduation rates, etc. And then there's outcome data, and that is often found in surveys and assessments, though not always. For BSK, that is better off data. So it helps you measure the impact of your program. And a lot of the times we think about that as self-reported by a client, like in a survey or assessment, but it could also be something totally different. Like it could be success stories from your case notes or a photo voice project or a client story or an interview that you did for a fundraiser or for a news story, things like that. So it's easy to just think of data as just numbers, but data is any information and that can help you demonstrate your impact for this category. And so to think about all of the different types of data that you're collecting, sometimes it can be useful to make something called a data map. I find this really satisfying because I love spreadsheets, but even if you don't love spreadsheets, it's really helpful because it can help you sort of pinpoint where you're getting what data. So this involves going through all of your data tools like forms, surveys, etc., and laying out what data you get from each of them in one place. So one advantage of this is that you can see whether you're double collecting data. For example, maybe you're asking your clients for their date of birth in one area and then their age in another area. And you could think about, is that necessary or is it just putting more work on the client? Or maybe it is really important, it's up to you all. You can also see if there's any big gaps in what you're collecting. And so when you map out your data, you want to look at what's the name of the form or tool, for example, in an intake form. What is the data being collected? So for example, date of birth. When is it collected? Maybe when someone joins your program. Is it collected more than once? How often? So for date of birth, that's not going to change, but for something else like housing status, maybe you want to be collecting that, periodically. And if you're not already, it's something you should consider doing. And then what format is it collected in? So again, for the date of birth example, are you collecting it as date of birth or age? In terms of housing, is it self-reported where someone can say, whatever they want and write something in, or is it like a multiple choice? And one more thing about how often is that it can be really useful to collect stories over time and think about how often are you asking someone something, because then you can show change. I think our next slide is just a sort of little screenshot of a data map. So you can see here that there's an intake form and some other forms where we're showing what fields, what data is collected, how often. It's really easy to do this in a spreadsheet. And seeing it all laid out like this is just a really helpful way to start to look at what measures might be able to answer that CQI question that you're posing. There are also lots of other sources of data besides your own program's data. So this stuff doesn't necessarily have to be included in a data map, but there's probably a lot of data that your organization collects that you might not collect in your specific program. So for example, how many of your clients are receiving support from another program in your organization through internal referrals? One example of this could be if your doula program, how many clients in your doula program also attended a lactation lounge or a workshop? Or how many clients in your home visiting program also then went to your family center to receive diapers? So it can be helpful to show that sort of holistic support, and that's an organization-wide data point. I don't know that much about Help Me Grow, but I know that for those of you collecting Help Me Grow data, you can make some interesting connections there about resources and referrals. And staff data might also be useful. So, we talked before about retention, but you could also look at staff demographics to show that your staff really reflect the populations you're serving. Or there might be outcome data that is organization wide that you can use to reflect back on your specific program, like a satisfaction survey. So there's other potential sources of data that are larger and more contextual, besides just what you guys are potentially collecting in your program. And then finally, there is plenty of public data that you could use to also inform your CQI process. We have a whole page on our website about public data sources that includes all of these links and many more. Meredith just put it in the chat. And it can be both daunting and exciting to think about using public data because there is so much stuff out there, but it can really help you contextualize what your program is doing. You can put into perspective the external forces that are impacting your clients, or you could compare your data to citywide, statewide, county, nationwide data to show how demographics are changing in your area, or that your program has higher graduation rates than the average person in your city, or whatever you want to demonstrate. So there are so many different types of public data sources, and you could look at school data. So here we've got the state superintendent office or the US Department of Education. Meredith made the really good point when we were planning this, that often school districts have really up-to-date information on demographics for a particular school district, and that's perhaps gathered more frequently than the census. So that could be a source, even if you don't work with school-age children, that could maybe be a useful source of information for what languages are spoken in your county or city. There's also government-wide data, of course, the census, but there's also plenty of data at the city, county, and state level. And then there's also data like public health data. So even BSK, a lot of the data that they gather is publicly available. And it can be really useful for you to show, contextualizing your program and your participants and clients and their stories in larger trends. Does anyone have questions about data sources? I know that I just went through a bunch of different types of sources and the data review.
Rose, happy to brainstorm with you if you have some ideas of how you'd like to make comparisons or contextualize your data. Hit us up. We're happy to talk about it. Awesome. Thank you, Em. All right, so data review. So as part of this step, we talked about operationalizing. What do you mean by your questions? And then looking at your data. How can we answer it, right? So we've talked about operationalizing and reviewing the data. Now we can start to talk about how do you match your data with your questions? How do you take it to the next step? And let's look at how do you look at the full process? So I'm gonna talk about an example. So a lot of programs want to know, how do we know if we're achieving our mission? So the first thing you would want to do if you want to know, are you achieving your mission, is you would want to look at your mission, right? So this is just copied and pasted off of the Iraqi Community Center of Washington's website. We love them. We are a 501c3 nonprofit organization providing services focused on providing culturally and linguistically competent social services to Iraqi refugees in Washington state to obtain self-sufficiency and make a successful transition to the life in America. That is their mission, right? So that makes total sense. Where would you start? Like, what on here needs to be defined or operationalized? Social services, yeah. What do you mean by social services? Self-sufficiency, what does that mean? What does that look like? Yeah, both of those are great examples. Yeah, I mean, to me, when I look at this, I think, well, there are, half a dozen things that I want to know more about, so I know if we can measure it, right? So when I look at a mission like this is what I'm looking for. I want to know, okay, what do you mean by all of these things? The social service was a good add-on. I should have grabbed that. And successful transition. I completely agree. All right, so to me, what do you mean by culturally competent social services? Right, so maybe that means you're using a culture-based approach or matching demographics where you're making sure that your staff reflects the demographics of your clients. So is that what you mean by culturally competent social services? So the first thing I would ask the Iraqi folks is to, okay, let's define that, right? And when it says linguistically competent, what does that mean? Does it mean that the social services are provided in Arabic? Or does it mean you're asking people up front for their preferred language and then you're giving the services in their preferred language, right? So what is it and what isn't it, right? So operationalizing. And then what do you mean by Iraqi refugees? I mean, maybe that has just maybe that is obvious to your group, but maybe not, because there are frequently going to be exceptions, right? So do you mean somebody that was born in Iraq? Does it mean somebody, how do you know if refugee status? Does it have to be official? Does it have to be self-defined? Do you mean somebody who was, what if you were born in another country, but then you spent time in Iraq before you came to the US? Or you went from Iraq to 2 other countries and then you came to the US. Like, how are you going to define what it is and what it's not? And then, yeah, Washington State, again, hopefully that's a pretty clear one, but just making sure, do you mean someone currently living anywhere in Washington? Or do you want to focus on Western Washington, something like that? And then obtain self-sufficiency. Talk about a huge concept, making a successful transition, huge concept. So what an incredible opportunity if you have a team really hashing that out. What do we mean by that? Does that mean you're self-sufficient if you secure employment? Is that enough? Or do we mean people are able to navigate systems? Do we mean that people are relying on no social services anymore? Do we know that we're doing well when people stop coming to us? Or does that just mean they stopped coming to us, right? So you really have to operationalize all of those. But then the next step would be, okay, once we have our definitions, let's review the data. What are we collecting that could maybe help us see if we're doing that? Okay, so we want to have culturally competent social services. So maybe we need to look at what topics do we discuss at our home visits? Would you consider those to be culturally competent? Who's coming to our events where we talk about cultural topics? Is that considered culturally competent social services? Maybe looking at our staff info to see if they match the demographics of our clients, right? So you can start to actually get into concrete, where are we collecting data points that might help us tell that story. For linguistically competent, what languages are we providing our services in? Are you asking that? I mean, do you have a box that you can check and say, at this event, we held it in Arabic, or this event was held in another language? Iraqi refugees, maybe you're collecting the date of arrival in the US on your intake form. So that can help you say something. Washington State, you can use current address, you can use the whole history of addresses, whatever makes sense to you. And then maybe for self-sufficiency and successful transition, maybe what you're doing is you're going into your goal tracking forms and you're looking through the notes to see, are people meeting their goals for their definition of self-sufficiency? Or maybe you're looking at how many people secured employment because that's what you decided was the goal. Or how do people feel about navigating the education system, if that was your goal, right? So this is the data review where you actually look, okay, where on our forms can I pull out data to tell this story? So then, yeah, you can start to go, okay, so what we need is, we need to look at our event reviews. And this is a type of form that we've made for quite a bit of our, quite a few of our clients. And it's because they're always putting on events and they're always putting on workshops, but they haven't been collecting data on those events. What topics did you talk about? How many people came? What was the level of engagement? Was the guest speaker any good? You want to invite them back? You know, so we make a lot of forms that we call event reviews. So you can start to capture some of this information. Are you providing culturally responsive services, right? So event reviews, maybe that's a form that you have and you can use. Maybe staff intake forms, if HR does something like that. Preferred language you probably have on your intake form somewhere, and if not, that's always a great question to ask. What language are you providing services in? So on your home visit forms or program forms or case management forms, you may have that. Yeah, current address, goal tracking, intake forms. You start to see that within just a few forms, you can collect all of these different types of information. So using a campaign to collect data, what do you mean by that? If you don't mind sharing. In Salesforce, oh yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, so I think that some of you here probably use something like Salesforce, or I know some of your organizations use Apricot, right? So you can use that to collect all of these data points, and then you can build reports to have it tell you if you are meeting these goals. You could set up reports to say, for everyone who lives in Washington State, what is their preferred language and what is their attendance? Like you could start to put together these in a report to tell you the answers to, are we achieving our mission? So then let's try this with some real life examples. We had you ask some questions earlier that what you wish you knew about your program. So Hafida, hopefully that I'm doing that correctly. Your question was, I wish I knew what impact our parenting groups had on the children of the parents. What would you operationalize in here? And feel free to unmute or put in chat. I'd love to hear what people think.
This is Hafida. I mean, there's a couple different ways to do that. I mean, so is operationalization in this particular example, like the question or the, because I mean, I could say like collect impact stories, for example, or are you asking like what the actual, is collect impact stories somewhere in the vicinity?
Yeah, I actually was wondering about that. When you want to know something about like impact, if you want to purposefully keep it open so that you can see what those impacts are, instead of just predicting, like I think they're going to be A, B, C, yes or no, did they achieve those? I mean, that is one approach, but I generally love the approach of what impacts. So then it would be those impact stories, right? So then where in your data collection process do you have an opportunity to get those impact stories? Are you following up with people 6 months after the class, 1 year after the class, and then how are you collecting it? And I'm guessing that if you send a survey, you're going to get minimal information, but if you're interviewing or focus groups, you'll probably get more rich, robust information that can help you understand not just if there was an impact, but what those impacts were. So I think that definitely is an approach. So then I guess what I would wonder about operationalizing is, would you want to decide what impact is up front, or would you want to be open to it?
I also see 2 more questions in the chat related. What does the parenting group offer exactly? And then after the parenting group, what changes or what has changed about the parents parenting?
Yeah, those are good questions. So yeah, I would, as a group, want to ask, how will we know an impact when we see it? Or what were we hoping to see? Or what did we set out to see? Do we want to know from the parents that they changed their parenting style? Or do you want to ask the children in 5 years, what is it that you like about your parenting? I mean, this is a little abstract. I think that would be very challenging to do. But yeah, so that's a good question. So what changed about your parenting? I think that there are some really interesting measures of child and caregiver attachments. I think that would be an interesting assessment, or an interesting way of looking at it, to see if it impacted attachments. But I would be really curious what your goals are for the types of impacts you want to have on the parenting groups.
Yeah, I mean, the mission of the organization really has to do with, like, I mean, it's a pretty big mission in the sense of like a more like bringing children of color in Seattle being born and raised into loving communities that are, justice-based and equitable. So, I mean, I think maybe impact stories might be a good place to begin to kind of suss out what kinds of impacts we could have. But I guess it's also not an either or situation as well. I mean, we could ask questions. I'm thinking like, how comfortable do you feel talking about race or racism with your children, like before they join the parent group? And then how comfortable do you feel after? So like doing an entry survey and then like a exit, so like end survey, because all of our parent groups are like cohorts. They last like 8 to 10 weeks. So yeah, maybe asking the parents how equipped they feel, or have they done tangible, like have they made any changes? I think somebody asked like, what has changed? Like, have you made any changes? What kinds of changes? So I suppose there's a way to get just sort of numbers like that. And you can ask them even at the beginning of each parent group or as they come in, and then we could send them an after survey. So it can happen during the parent groups, or it can happen just outside of them.
And I love that. So you use the RICE curriculum you put in here. So race, identity, culture, and equity. I could see asking questions that really get at those very specific elements of the curriculum. Like, do you feel more connected to people with whom you share an identity or you share a culture? I'm getting that kind of pre-test, post-test. And some of these, I know that we work with you, so I'd love to, if you want to sit down and brainstorm, it's fun. But at the end of each class, if there was just a few quick questions, how connected do you feel? Just 3 or 4 easy questions at the end of each class, and then at the end of the entire workshop, filling out, kind of pre-test and post-test.
I also,
please.
I also like what you said about maybe initially using interviews and then, from there seeing what data you gather, because the important thing to remember is that this is, a cycle like Meredith showed initially. And so it's not like a static one-time thing that you just do. Hopefully it's continuous and you're sort of constantly looking at the data and then using that to inform your decision making. So of course, ideally you then want some sort of way of measuring impact over time that is consistent so that you can show data for, several years. But it's okay if you're just working with what you've got first, looking at what you can do right now, and then using that data to inform a future way of gathering data or a future assessment. You don't have to, design the perfect thing right now.
Yeah, that's a great point. Honestly, that's the proper way of developing a survey. If you do, if you really start from scratch, it's to start with interviews and to ask people what were the impacts and get those, so I would probably, something like interviews or focus groups with people who have graduated or have, finished a cohort. And then based on that, that's how you start to develop survey questions, because you start to learn what are the themes to ask about. So that is, if you have all of the time and resources in the world to do a full process of coming up with a survey, that's the ideal approach. So I love that. Anything else in here that we would want to operationalize, or are you collecting any data now that you think can help you tell this story? about impacts?
Oh, we have a pretty long registration form. I believe we do send a survey out after the workshop, after the groups end. It's supposed to go out within like a week of the last session. So yes, there's some, I don't actually know what all the questions are on there. But I do more family programs than parent groups. And I more work with the parent educators who run the groups, but yeah, so I don't know what the questions are, but yes, the answer is yes, there is some assessment and like surveying that happens. The parent educators who facilitate these groups, they fill out like after every session, they kind of fill out a form. I guess it's like an event review form that you're talking about earlier, where they're like, this is who showed up. If there was a guest speaker or presenter, like this is who the guest, this is how that went, and just kind of like gives them a chance to check in and process about how each session ran from week to week. And then, yeah, so yeah, there's already information in there, but I've actually not seen it. We don't talk about it too much, so.
Yeah, but because we work with your organization, I get a little bit of insider knowledge about those reflections, of the fact that they fill those out after every session. And I can't remember now because I haven't looked at it in a while, but I wonder about putting something in that reflection that's a place to capture success stories. And not success stories like something big and dramatic happened, but something small happened. When people just mention, ooh, this week, this is what happened, and that felt really good. If in that weekly, every time after a class, if there's a chance to capture some of those success stories, by the time it comes around to filling out another grant application or getting more funding for that program, you're going to have 50 success stories, or we're going to have a whole list of ways of understanding your impacts, just from those little.
Yeah, I think right now, some of that stuff I think is getting used. I think a lot of this has been driven by our our communications director, who was previously the operations director. So it was kind of and then when we didn't have an operations person, they were doing both. So that was really handy because they operationalized a lot of things to provide them with what they needed to like do outreach and create social media things. So there's a lot of little, blurbs and things like that captured from parents who've attended. I'm not certain how much that feedback is affecting like the actual parent groups themselves. So that's something I'd want to ask about and find out, be a little bit more curious about how does that feedback influence from the participants. I think the parent educator feedback has influenced some tweaking of curriculum and things like that, but I don't know how much the parent feedback has changed anything.
Yeah, I can see that being pretty powerful, to put together a team that's a family member, a parent educator, a couple people at various levels in the organization, and just work together. I love how interconnected it already is, that you're already thinking about how can we use data in our social media? How can we use it? I mean, you're already in a great place that you're thinking about it holistically. That's really hard for people to do. Thank you so much for being willing to let us play with your question. That's great. And we do have another. And I hope if you are comfortable unmuting and telling us a little bit about your question, or what were you thinking you'd want to operationalize, or if other people have ideas about what to operationalize with this question. Are we including the voices of parents and families?
That's the question I asked, because we work with families, parents who speak different language and also from different cultural background. So our program is working with the children, who have unique learning disabilities. So sometimes it's hard to understand if the parents understand what we're doing in our program, if we're really helping the children. So I mean, we just try like this year we tried to do like parents conference to ask their goals, like what do you hope to achieve? Like, what are your 3 goals for your children? And then we use the parents' goals to tie to the program. Like, we also do data collection was we define the behavior to match the goals to provide data to the parents. It's actually our first time, so I don't know. Yeah, so I don't know, like sometimes if we're including their voice, obviously we are trying to, but sometimes it's just hard to give them the data to meet what they want. Yeah.
That's really cool that you're already putting, we around here, we call them feedback loops, that you're not just taking the data, that you're giving it back. I think that's really, really cool. And so then I guess your question is, are we including them? So what I would want to operationalize is, what do you mean by including? That we're asking questions, or that we're doing something with the information that they give us? Yeah,
it's like more involvement, like involve the parents, partnership with the parents about what we're teaching their children. So they're more, they understand what we're teaching rather than, oh, I'm sending my children to a program, if that makes sense. Because then if they know what we're doing, so they will be more likely to understand why why they want their children to be in the program, right?
Yeah. Do you already have parent surveys that you give every 6 months or every year, something like that? Or
yeah, so we have like survey, twice a year.
Great. Yeah. So I think too, and Em said this for the last one too. So they put the comment, sounds like it's time for a data map. That actually might be helpful for yours as well, to just map out at what touch points are we checking in with parents. So you can just see it laid out. Are we talking to them once a year? And is that enough? Are we talking to them every 3 months? Is that too much? So you can look and see at every point that we talk to parents, how frequently is that, and what are we asking them? And is that giving us data that can help us improve our programs? I mean, it sounds like you're being very thoughtful about it already, which is great. Does anyone else have thoughts about this question? Oh, and also added, you mentioned a parent town hall. That is a great place to gather data on if parents are feeling involved and included. Yeah. Em's point is, even just attendance at an event like that tells you something, that they are engaged enough to show up to an event like that. So that's true. So measuring attendance, and I like to, if I can, it's hard to do, but keep a measure of level of engagements. Were parents just sitting there and receiving, or were they actively involved? Were they offering suggestions? And that tells you a lot about your program as well, how welcoming you are to voices.
In regards to involving the voice of parents and families, we also involve, I work with Mia. Hi, my name is Adam. So we definitely involve the youth voice as well, especially during our programming. So towards the end, we ask them how our programming went. So they'll let us know sweet, it went well, sour, or so-and-so. And then we'll ask a follow-up question. Like, okay, which part did you like, or which part did you not like, and what can we do to make it sweet next time or better? Those are something that we collect pretty much each time we have our program, and then we're able to, based on the answers they give us, we're able to make those necessary changes. So if we have a subject matter that is too challenging for them, we'll modify it, or if it's too easy and they're feeling bored, then we'll increase the level of challenge for them to meet their need.
Oh, that's amazing. It's so creative. I love it. Sweet, sour, and so-so. I love it. I mean, I've used emojis before, the like smiley face and frowny face, or something like that, like that.
Yeah, that's some of our students are also visual. So we'll use visual images for them to understand what those terms are.
Oh, that's so great. Yeah, I would recommend using visuals anytime you have, as long as the symbols can work across culture. I think the visual things can be so great for if you are putting on an event where not everyone speaks the same language, or there are low levels of literacy. It's just great to have another alternative besides the survey. You can have something visual You could have people put a Post-it on the smiley poster or the frowny poster. You know, there's just ways that you can make it interactive and build evaluation into your practices. Great. Thank you so much for being willing to share about your practices. This is awesome. All right, so then once you're able to, look at your data, I made a fancy data map, I kind of know what we're collecting. You might find out that you don't have all the data you need or all the data you want. You may find out that there are some gaps, and that's okay, and that's to be expected. But what I would say is, don't just say, okay, now we need to add 3 more surveys. Like, look and see where can we strategically weave in a couple points of evaluation. And that is step 4, data planning. So that is where you make a plan. You find the gaps and you make a plan to fill the gaps. So what do we wish we were collecting? What can we collect? How are we going to fill that gap? So what do you do about that? Find the gaps and fill them, right? So the gaps are things that you want to be able to measure, but you don't currently measure them in the right way. And what we've all learned being in the data world is sometimes you've been measuring it away for a long time and that way doesn't work anymore. Or you're measuring it in a way, like for example, you may find out that you're asking age. And then what you find out later is if you had date of birth, you would know how old they were at the beginning and how old they were at the end, but because you just have the one static age, it didn't change with age, right? So you find the gaps, like that's close, but it's not quite what we need to have. And then you figure out how are we going to fill those gaps. So you're back to operationalization, right? So really ask yourself, what is it that we're trying to measure? And make sure that you're all on the same page. Again, because you have a team, you can work on this together, right? So instead of just saying like throwing something out there, you can say, okay, what do we really need to know? What are we really trying to get at? And you can come up with a plan. And then you can determine the best indicator. An indicator, again, is such a researchy word, but what it means is it's a measure, but it indicates something. Nothing is ever going to prove something. Well, this person got a job, so it proves our program is the coolest program in the world. It probably is the coolest program in the world, but really it's indicating, like this is providing some evidence that, we're going in the right direction. So figure out what is the best way if we had a number or if we had a story, we would know, yeah, we are doing it right. And then figure out what's the best timing, right? So then is it after every class? Is it a pre-test and a post-test? Is it just at the end because we want to, not give too many data collection points because we know that can turn off some families or something like that, right? So figuring out what you want to measure, how often, when, should it only be at intake, should it only be at graduation, and then decide as a group, what's the best way to measure that? What is going to actually be, and here are my codes, what's going to be simple, straightforward, and sustainable? The thing about adding something like a whole survey to your repertoire, it's great. And I love things like that, or adding focus groups, something like that, but they're time intensive, they're hard. And then language changes over time. Ideas change over time. So if you have a survey that you give tomorrow, the same questions may rub people the wrong way 3 years from now, or the same questions are just not relevant. I think that we didn't know, if you've been in Seattle for 20, 30 years, you probably didn't know we needed to be so closely watching housing, that was going to be an emerging issue, right? And it so is. So just know that you want to try to ask your questions and you want to try to add measures that are going to be simple, low barrier, straightforward that people can understand, but also sustainable. You want it to be not too burdensome on staff, not too burdensome on families, or things aren't going to last. It's not going to stay part of your practice. That's the data planning. We're not going super deep into that one because there's so many other fun things, but just make a plan and try to keep it simple, straightforward, sustainable. Then what you also have to do is look critically again at your data processes. And it's the same pro tip here. Keep it simple, straightforward, and sustainable. Really say, okay, now we've said we need these 5 new measures if we want to be able to answer these questions. Look at your tools. Where can you add 1 more field to an intake form instead of having a whole separate survey? Can you add 1 field to a home visiting form or to the event review? If you need to add a new form, like an event review, great. If that's going to give you several data points, that might be worth it. But if it's going to be a lot of labor, that's just worth thinking about. But then you don't want to just weave it into your tools. You want to weave it into your practices. Anytime you add a new measure, get together with your staff and make sure everyone's on the same page with what you mean. Let them know what you're trying to do with that data, so people are set up for success on how to collect it. So really set yourself up for success as an organization by making sure you're on the same page. And then if you work with us, we can help you with your Apricot or your Insight, right? To make sure that you're capturing it and you have a place to store it. So not only are you asking the questions, but you have a place to capture the answers when you get them. Em, do you want to make your comment here?
Yeah, I think that that's another reason why it's really important to have program staff on your team, because if you do determine, for example, that you need to add a new survey, if people don't understand why, and if you haven't had the feedback of the person who might need to be administering the survey during this whole process, it's going to be a huge burden on folks and they might not understand why it's important. But if everyone's been involved and they really understand, okay, we thought long and hard about this, and the reason that we need to add it is so that we can know this about our families, people will be excited to administer it, hopefully. I mean, that's the ideal, but I think that having people of all different levels, and especially the people who are going to be implementing these data changes as part of the team, is crucial.
Got to have that buy-in. So thank you, Em, so much for that. And then this is the other part that I just have too much fun with. So the data analysis. Okay, you collected all this data. What are you going to do with it? How are you going to look at it as a team? So this is step 6, right? We're almost all the way through our cycle. How do you want to look at your data? And we have 2 big tips here. And I mean, I think that most of us know how to look at the frequency, those outputs. This is how many workshops we held. This is how many parenting classes we hosted. But data gets really a lot more interesting when you start to consider the intersections. And if you are a research person, at least the way that I learned it was called crosstabs, right? Or maybe if you've seen a pivot table in either Excel or Google Sheets, you know what I mean, where you're taking one data point and you're intersecting it with another data point. So not only are you looking at, hey, are all of our parents satisfied, but you're looking at satisfaction rate by preferred language. Do our Arabic speaking families express more satisfaction than our Farsi speaking families, right? That's where you can start to get into some real nuance, it's your intersections. This is one that I've heard about a lot, our home visit cancellation rates. You can just look and say, wow, 26% of our home visits are canceled. And that's interesting in and of itself. But what if you dig a little deeper, you look at this intersection and you find out the reason people are canceling home visits is because when they started the program, they didn't have a full-time job and now they do. The program was so successful and they were able to meet their goals and they got a full-time job, but now they're not available during the day anymore, right? So instead of just having a story that looks like, oh my gosh, we're failing, we're having more cancellations, you can figure out the nuance. Well, there is more to that story. As people become more employed, they're less likely to be able to make the 9-to-5 schedule. Right? What about confidence in parenting? Again, super interesting to know across the board, but what if you looked at confidence in parenting by relationship status? What if someone has some co-parenting partner that either chips away at their confidence or it helps their confidence because at least they have someone to bounce around with and say, man, I'm feeling like I did that wrong. What's your take on that, right? So just being able to look more nuanced with those intersections. So maybe parent-child interaction scores, you could look at by how long you've been in the US, right? Because there's just different norms around the world about parent-child interactions. Maybe breastfeeding rates by age of parent. I know the breastfeeding rates by employment status is huge too, because even though there are laws that say you're able to breastfeed, not every workplace sets you up to be able to do that safely and comfortably, right? So there's always more to the story. And it's great if you have a team to bounce around ideas. Ooh, try it by this, try it by that. What if this is the story? What if that is the story? And it's okay if you're not an Excel wizard. It's okay if that part is not comfortable to you. You know, a group like us, or finding somebody who knows how to do that data analysis, we love doing this, and we can come join you, or just find, you know, some nerd like us somewhere that will come and do this. We love it. And I'm sure most of you already have this skill set. So here's an example of some intersections. So in this example, we have 50 parents, right? So this is the count of client IDs. So there's 50 parents. This is the birth method, right? And this organization collects the method of birth in 5 categories. They measure planned C-sections, unplanned C-sections, emergency C-sections. So there's 3 categories of C-sections plus vaginal and assisted vaginal. So that's the way that this organization has chosen to measure birth methods. They also ask, this organization actually asks for a self-identified race question, and then they also ask what kind of federal race category do you fit into. And so when you look at your data this way, where it's just numbers, this many people said this many people said that, this is called a frequency, right? So the frequency of someone self-identifying as Asian, 4 out of the 50 folks did that. The frequency of folks who identified as Native Hawaiian or Pacific Islander was 5, right? So that's just frequency. So that in of itself, again, interesting. But it's even more interesting when you look at the intersection. So across the top, what you see are the 5 categories of birthing methods that you saw on the previous slide. And then on the left, you have these racial ethnic identity categories. And you can see there's a much more nuanced story when you do this. So among the clients who identified as Asian, 25% had an emergency C-section. Okay, now that's interesting, right? And I will point out that there are 4 people who identified as Asian here. So 25% is 1 person. So before you go, oh my gosh, like, you know, we need more data to understand the full story. But you already see that there's a story that in comparison to other groups, many of those other groups, there were no emergency sections, but there was for clients who identify as Asian, and there were for clients who identify as Black or African American. Same with planned C-section, right? So there you have your indigenous clients, are maybe doctors are more likely to tell their indigenous clients, I recommend you get a C-section. And that's why it was a planned C-section, right? So you can start to see where is the nuance there. For unplanned C-section, you can see that for a lot of groups it's 0, but for Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, and for white, there were more unplanned C-sections. So it just becomes an interesting way to look at your story in a more nuanced way, especially if you're caring about the inequities, then this is a really powerful way to see where are the gaps, where are the differences. Any questions about intersections?
Can you go back to the previous slide for just a second? Because I'm not sure. Okay. So, I mean, if you go back to the other one, I mean, it feels like interpreting data is always, you know, because like you don't want to infer too much. Like I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, well, emergency C-sections versus, like there's such a huge disparity there, but like, is that, you know, is it happening at the hospital with the care providers there? Is it having to do with like health and being seen by a professional like during your pregnancy? Are these people who are coming in to give birth and they haven't had, you know, prenatal care? So like, what do you recommend in terms of like how to interpret, like who do you go to, or like when you start asking questions like, why are these numbers the way they are? Like, unless you're a subject matter expert, like what are you supposed to know?
Yeah, well, my first thing is that the first thing when I looked at this, I was like, wait, I need to know how could it possibly be 25%? So I went back a slide and I went, oh, because it's only 4 people. So 25% is 1%. So that's my first kind of gut check on all of this. And that tells me, okay, if this was more than 50, if this was 500, maybe a different story would emerge. But then the next questions I would start asking, okay, if there are disparities, what are the possible explanations for this? And because this data is actually from a doula service, then you could actually ask the doulas, when do you most likely see somebody going into emergency C-section? And you could get the kind of anecdotal stories from the doulas, or honestly, they could probably tell you because they're so intimately involved with this. And then you can go into the data and look for other intersections, which is what I would do. So I would say for people who regularly visited the doctor before their birth, what were their emergency C-section outcome? For people who didn't have a steady provider, what were their C-sections? So I would look at 3 or 4 other data points as an intersection to see if it helped explain some of that difference. Yeah. And I think the conclusion is we need more data, right? That was M's point. And I think in this case, this is definitely just an example. But the good news is because they have been collecting this data for so long, I mean, I just grabbed a little tiny sample, but they actually have thousands of cases. So then they really can say, okay, not only can we break it down by race, we can break it down by race and hospital. So we can tell you if you're more likely to if you go to this hospital, you're more likely to have it suggested to you that you do it versus if you go to this hospital. So the more data you get over time, you can actually tell a really powerful story. Thank you for the questions. That's great. Are there questions about either this or intersections generally? Crosstabs? Awesome. My other suggestion is to consider comparisons. Now, Em went over a bunch of different data sources that you could think about, and there's just so much out there. If you really want to understand your story, think about the comparisons. And so when I was a professor, I taught criminology classes, and I would always ask my students, if you heard the homicide rate in Los Angeles was 50, you know, if like 50 people were murdered in Los Angeles, what would that mean to you? Well, it depends. Do you mean by the day? Do you mean in an hour? Do you mean in a year? Like you need more context to understand your numbers, right? So you may know that your graduation rate for your clients is 79%. That's probably good. That sounds really good. But you'll know more if you compare it to other programs like yours, right? That actually gives you a much more robust story to tell. So how do your breastfeeding rates compare to national averages, something like that? It's also really helpful and interesting when you are able to compare your data against other time periods. So 2 years ago, housing came up the most frequently. 1 year ago, it was, we need technology because suddenly my kid is taking classes in my living room, right? And then maybe 6 months ago, it was something different, right? So being able to look at different time periods to see what the trends are, to see what the patterns are, just tells you so much, and it helps you to be responsive. And I know dosages is a very medical word, but thinking about how frequently people participate can help you understand your impact. So for example, you might notice that people who come to your program weekly and the people who come monthly have different depression scores. Maybe it's something about that constant contact with you or that constant check-in that helps people feel more connected, right? And so just being able to look at your data in those different comparison ways, again, can tell you some really interesting stories. Back to our methods of birth. And so I'll show you here, I mean, again, this isn't all of their data, but this is just pulling out some data. What they do is they, as a program, they like to capture all 5 of these categories. But they know when they go to make comparisons with state data and federal data, they don't measure it exactly the same. So what they do is they lump together all of their C-section rates and they lump together all of their vaginal births so that they can make comparisons. So for this program, they have about a 12% C-section rate. I mean, I don't know enough about birth work to know if that's good or bad? I mean, I don't know, right? So you make a comparison. And what you actually find if you compare this data is that as of 2019, in the state of Washington, the C-section rate was 27.8%. It was so high. I mean, I don't think that I would have realized how high that was until seeing it is possible to have a 12% rate, right? I mean, and so maybe that's a case for having doulas and having people advocate for you. Or, maybe by having a doula, you go to the doctor more often, you get better prenatal care, right? But by looking at CDC data, you can actually make that comparison and you can get some nuanced information. And that helps you build a case, that helps you advocate in the legislature. Look, we need to do more about this. It helps you celebrate, it helps your doula stay motivated, right? It really helps you get perspective on how you're doing and what's successful, so you can do more of that. So I really find this to be incredibly fun and powerful to do that with our data. Any questions or thought about comparisons, or have you done any interesting comparisons with any of your data? Right, we're down to the last few minutes, so I'll make this point that the most important part of this whole process really are these three questions. After you've done all of this, you've gotten, you've pulled all this data together, this is where the decision making happens. This is where, as a team, you say what, so what, and now what. And here's what I mean by each of those. So you first ask what. Okay, what are we looking at here? Data is fun. I'm so glad you agree. All right, so what data are we reviewing today? Okay, let's look at it. What stands out? Why is that 25%? Why is that one 7%, right? Just start looking for those patterns and those trends and those outliers. Are there patterns? Are there patterns when you look month to month? Is it that every January there's a spike and every July it goes down again? Is there a story there? Over time, what are the trends? What's becoming more prevalent? What's becoming less prevalent? If we look at those intersections and comparisons, what other interesting stories emerge, right? So you just get the lay of the land. You start with what? What are we looking at here? And then when you start to find those stories, again, as a team, and that's why it's so valuable to have a team at every level discussing this together. Why is this important? What conclusions can we make? What's different since last time we did this, right? Because if this is cyclical, you should be looking for what changed and what didn't, right? So, okay, so what? What can we learn from this data? And then this is the good stuff, right? Okay, now what? Based on what we learned, what actions do we take? What program changes do we need? Where do we need to advocate? Where do we need to change our practices? What do we need to do to change our policies? Are we excluding people? By saying that they have to meet these requirements, are we making their progress less profound? Like, also, what supports do staff need? That is always a huge one. And I always think you should include staff. What supports do you need based on what the stories are that you're seeing here? And then decide, how will we know when it's changed? How will we know if progress is being made? Right? So having that discussion as a collective group, really playing with the data and then deciding, what are we going to do about this? And how will we know if our changes were successful? That's just my favorite part, I have to say. And again, this isn't just a one-time thing, right? Once you've done that analysis and you've figured out your so what and your now what, do it all over again. Whether you keep the same team or you say, you know what, we need to bring in another voice here. Based on this data, what I'm seeing is we need someone from behavioral health to be in the room. Or we need to involve more actual families who have been in this program so we can get their perspective, right? Reform your team as needed, revamp your questions, look at your data. Are those new measures working? Do we need to tweak those a little bit? Keep that cycle going. Maybe you don't have to hit every step every time, because maybe sometimes you don't need additional data points, but making sure that you're open to the possibility of all of those cycles again, or all those steps in the cycle. And that's it. That's the whole cycle. That's data for decision making. Any thoughts, questions? Anything? I feel like I've been talking for so long, so please talk.
Thank you for hanging in there so late. We're talking
Yeah.
about data. That was surprisingly interesting. And yeah, thank you.
Good. No, we would love to work with you more. So give us a holler anytime. And I'll put in a shameless plug too, that this is our emails. So reach out to either of us anytime. Those are the 2 Empower tools that we talked about. And before you go too far, I also want to mention that these are the other